return, the sector has given us results-based funding, social bonds, participatory grant-making with micro grants. I have zero faith in our sector's ability to reform itself, so it's incumbent upon the federal government of Canada to make those changes from a legislative standpoint. We have been calling for, since our launch, 6 philanthropic pillars, from increasing the disbursement quota from 3.5% to 10%, lifting the restrictions on non-qualified donees, requiring all foundations to direct their assets towards 100% impact investments by 2030, introducing mandatory spend-down endowments for all registered foundations in Canada, and introducing guidelines to grandfather all existing foundations to spend their assets within a 30-year timeline, requiring a disbursement quota on each individual donor-advised fund, and providing matching incentives to foundations that transfer up to 3.5% of their capital assets to Black-led, Black-mandated, Black-serving, or Indigenous-led philanthropic public foundations. So how are we going to get there? And the truck was one way to drive that conversation home, no pun intended. So when we parked that truck outside of City Hall, the reaction was swift on all sides. And the philanthropic sector of Canada reacted with fear and shock. You should check my inbox if you question that. For about 3 months straight, I received significant amount of death threats, insults, questioning of my role in the philanthropic sector, questioning of the patrons that provide us our funding and their role in the impact investing community. However, the government reacted a little bit more proactively. They called for feedback from all Canadians. They slightly implemented 2 of the pillars we were calling for, from increasing the disbursement quota from 3.5% to 5%, which will result in over $900 million in charities next year, and removing the restrictions on non-qualified donee. Again, not really implementing all of our 6 pillars, but the federal government way, doing a little bit at a time. We begged and plead with this sector to justify the validity of these changes, often with the dead bodies within our communities, and all we have received is continuous virtue signaling. I don't believe in us because we haven't demonstrated the necessary leadership to make transformational investments to solve these issues. See, paper proclamations of diversity, equity, trust-based philanthropy must be backed by changes in governance, in bylaws, in strategic mandates, along with mission-based granting and impact investing. The era of shock money in relation to the death of George Floyd has come and gone. Our moment of quiet consciousness is over. I hope this philanthropic sector will not let donor fatigue creep in. Less than 1% of charitable giving in this country goes to Black charities. Less than 1% goes to Indigenous groups. The fact that Brigham Young University in Utah is able to raise 1.5% more than all Indigenous groups in this country collectively get is a fundamental failure of philanthropy. It's hard to justify $120 billion in philanthropic assets when Indigenous communities suffer from intergenerational boil water advisories, or that violence in the city of Toronto has increased 127% in the last 3 years, or that democracies around the world were being hijacked prior to the invasion of Ukraine. If you were paying attention, there were several Russian-backed coups in West Africa, or the fact that white extremism is on the rise, or that wealth disparity increases, or mental health is predominant amongst young people. The power dynamics within the charitable sector has caused a tremendous harm to Black and Indigenous communities. The donor-centric approach, an often white donor-centric approach, has created a dangerous environment in which only major charities with fund development staff that have the resources to prospect, cultivate, and secure donors that actually can provide those major transformational gifts. Small, rural, local not-for-profits often get left out. And I think it's extremely telling that the majority of this power is siloed into 2 major groups. Fund managers that have the incentives to grow endowments, and grant executives who are often disconnected from the communities that they claim to be serving, who lack the lived experiences of those same communities. The notion that holding these assets in perpetuity is helping our ability to sustain our work is offensive, and it's extremely hubris of philanthropy to believe that no new money will come in. We're about to witness the largest wealth transfer in Canadian history. Most of these funds going to Gen X and millennials. How much of these assets will grow our philanthropic sector from 120 billion to who knows what? How much is too much? How much more webinars, discussions, conferences, op-eds do we need before we fundamentally question the role of philanthropy in our society? The philanthropic sector of Canada lacks the creativity and simplicity. It is not too hard to find grassroots organizations to fund or non-qualified donees. It is not that complicated to use your endowment to invest in cooperative housing and not real estate investment trusts. It is not that complicated to divest from the extraction sector and not be distracted by greenwashing ESG funds. It is not that complicated to invest in the creative industries, to fund global infrastructure, to support global feminist movements, and that means adequately funding feminist futures. And to be honest, a lot of the institutions in this space that can play that role do not. We need individual community foundations across this country to demonstrate they're actually all in. We are not interested in allyship. We need community foundations in this country to be accomplices for the communities that they claim to serve and not their fund holders.